recording.
Recording in progress.
So welcome, everybody. Just a service announcement. We will meet next week, and then I think we will be taking a summer break after next Thursday's Shiur. You know that Rosh Chodesh Av is Wednesday, so Thursday will be the 2nd of Av, and we'll meet then, and then we'll take a bit of a break. I want to dedicate the Shiur tonight to the memory of two individuals. One is Azriel ben Tzvi Hirsch Halevi, who is Janice Patansky's late father, and also to the memory of Rav Shalom Gold. Many of us knew Rabbi Gold quite well. He was a remarkable person and came from West Hempstead, where he was the rabbi, and made a deep impression on many, many people in Israel during the course of many years here. So both of them should have an Aliyat Neshama. I want to talk tonight about a little bit of a different subject and discuss some principles for raising happy, well-adjusted children, discuss what it is we owe to our children, and use the story that takes place not only in this week's Parsha, but a story that we began in Parshat Pinchas, the story of the daughters of Tzlaf Chad. It's a very fascinating story. If you get our weekly Parsha sheet, I wrote a little different aspect on how important the story is and how remarkable these 5 women were, and the example they set in terms of how to relate to controversy and to do it with respect, and their deep devotion to Eretz Yisrael. But I want to discuss another aspect of that story, which, as I said, not only began last week, but will continue in this week's reading of Matot Maseh, and will be the last subject discussed, and it will cap off the entire Sefer of Bamidbar. So let me kind of recapitulate what happens in this story. So Moshe is nearing the end of his life, and Am Yisrael is on the threshold of entering Eretz Yisrael after a very difficult 40 years in the desert. And one of the last things that Moshe is going to do is to follow God's instructions on who is eligible to receive a portion and the process for dividing the land among the tribes. Now, I should mention to begin with this idea of having every shevet, every tribe, have its ancestral land is a very important principle. And for many centuries, of course, this was in place so that you can look up and see where the different Shvatim have their area of land, and how important it was for everyone to feel that, in effect, we own a piece of the rock. This land is ours. Number one, we have our own stake in the land. So when we're fighting for our own land. And not only that, but if everybody does their share to work the land and make it profitable, then everyone benefits, and the country as a whole it becomes a wealthy and productive entity. So people were careful and they very, very devoted to their land, and this way no one felt that they're a second-class citizen. When you own land, somehow you have real estate, you feel connected, and it gives you a certain sense of deep attachment to the place where your home is, where your ancestral home is, etc. Unfortunately, today we don't have that system anymore, but it was important back then that people knew that this was going to remain in their family, and thus when we have the Yovel, even if land passes out of a family, because usually due to financial concerns, they knew that eventually on Yobel it'll come back to them. And so they regained their status, as it were, as a landowner. There's some countries, the United States as well, there was a time you could only vote if you owned land. So even then, people understood that you have a certain status when you are rooted in the land and it's yours. So the Torah tells us this rather remarkable incident that gets a lot of press coverage. Because the land was being divided among these tribes, not the 12 tribes, not counting, of course, the tribe of Levi, only men above the age of 20 were eligible to receive a portion of their land in Israel. We know, of course, that Judaism follows matrilineal descent. In other words, the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish, but the tribal identification is established through the father. The children belong to the father's tribe. So the quandary of the daughters of Tzlafchad, who Tzlafchad is, we've talked about that before. He may have been the person who was executed for the Makoshesh Eitzim. Some say maybe that other reasons are given or identification of him, but he dies in the desert and he doesn't leave any sons. So the daughters come forward, they want to receive a portion. This is prior to the division of the land. And since there are no male heirs to inherit his portion, they feel this is patently unfair. Why would that be given away to some other tribe just because there were no males to take over the land? This is a kind of predecessors to a whole movement that exists today about women's rights and standing up for what you feel is just. And they basically couch this, this petition, I won't call it a complaint, to Moshe Rabbeinu, and say that, you know, families' names are associated with the land. And, you know, in many places in England, this is particularly true, that people's homes, or if you want to have more, you want to call it an estate, they take on names of their own. This was true also in many parts of the South in the United States, that people attacked, there was a connection between the land and it had its own name. And they feel, well, this is unfair. So they come before Moshe, and this is going back to Parsha Pinchas, and they stand up, and it's interesting, Batam Modna Lifnei Moshe, they're upright, and they're proud of what they're saying, and they speak before Elazar Kohen and the Nisi'im. They're not afraid to go right to the top. And they say, Avinu meit bamidbar, hu lo ya b'toch ha'ida no'odim al Hashem b'dat korach. He did not mount an insurrection. You know, if there is an insurrection against the king, and Moshe was a kind of king, then what we call a mored b'malchut, you can take away their land. No, ki b'chet'o meit, he had a separate reason, a separate sin for dying. Ubanim lo ayulo, and we have no brothers, he had no sons. Lama yigara Shem Avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should we be denied? Why should the name of our father and the continuation of our ancestral connection to the land, ki ein lo bein, simply because he didn't have a son? Tenalan achuza, give us achuza. Achuza means a real possession. B'toch achei Avinu, among our family, among the brothers of our father. Well, so Moshe doesn't really know what to do, and he understands that this is a deep and important question with a lot of ramifications, and it's not simple. So, of course, he presents the question to Hashem, and in the end, we know God sides with the Benot Tzlafchad, and they are awarded their father's share in Israel. So the pasuk says that they each kiamutu bein lo v'avart b'nachleto levito, that if a person will die and has no sons, then the land will pass to the daughters. But the story does not end there, because the other members of the tribe and Tzlafchad was from the tribe, and they were all from the tribe of Menashe. They come and they have their own complaint. And they say that if Tzlafchad's daughters end up marrying men from other tribes, then their portions will be inherited by the sons from the other tribes, and the land being given to the daughters will be transferred away from the tribe of Menashe. So although the Benot Tzlafchad, they want their share, but the overall tribe of Menashe, which has its own prince, says, I don't want to lose the land either, because the larger our portion of land, the more productive it is, the better for our own shevet. So, be true to your shevet. So they have their own petition, and they don't want the size of their land diminished. So Moshe goes back to God and he says, they've got a good point, Hashem. And God's response is, okay, here's a compromise. Tzlafchad's daughters may marry only within their own tribe. And indeed, that's what happened. The five daughters marry their cousins. And for the next 14 years, any woman who inherited her father's property could only marry someone from the same tribe. But after the land was conquered and divided, that law ceased to be in effect. And from then on, an heiress could wed any man she pleased, even though it meant that ultimately that land would pass from the tribe, from its original allocation, to a new tribe. And according to one opinion, the Gemara, which is in Ta'anit, Daf Lamed Amud Bet, this requirement to marry within the tribe was officially abolished on the 15th of Av, and that's one of the reasons why we call Tu B'Av one of our happiest holidays, because it meant the restrictions as who you could marry and tribally was abolished, and you could marry anybody from any shevet. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of inheritance. According to Jewish law, a parent does not have to leave their children any inheritance whatsoever. Obviously, if a person dies with heirs and assets, then it will automatically go to the children, but there is no mitzvah in the Torah to leave anything to one's children. And along with this, I want to mention it's unrelated, but there's an interesting comment by the Rambam that may shock a lot of people that says a man is only required to support his children until they have reached the grand old age of 6. That's all. After 6, there's no obligation to support a child. And this law seems very, very strange, because we say that to be a Jew, to identify as a Jew, and to have the character of what a Jew should have, essentially, there are 3 attributes. One is rachamim, compassion. One is a Jew is a baishan. He is by nature, there is a sense of shame, in a sense, if you do something wrong, and gemilut chasadim, that we perform acts of kindness. So it's intrinsic for every Jewish parent. It's in our nature to be concerned for a child's well-being, especially if you consider it after the parent dies. Then for sure, you want to know that children are provided for. So how is it possible that there's no mitzvah to leave a child an inheritance or provide any kind of support, financial support for them past the age of 6? So I want to suggest, and I'm thankful to Yitzchak Zweig, who also brings up this whole subject and says that there's an incredible message here about raising children. And we'll get a little bit to psychological. Children, something I think that we all know, but perhaps this is at the heart of what we're trying to understand. Children are born as extremely selfish and self-absorbed beings. The only thing that they're acutely aware of is their personal discomfort. And that is why they cry and they scream until they get someone who comes to address their every need. And then they are used to the fact that when I, in any way, am not getting what I want, someone will come along and give it to me. And that's a stage in every baby's life. But there comes a point when parents need to be able to somehow move along the maturity of this initial stage of development so that the child doesn't always feel this way. And I think if we think about the children of this generation, that we often see that children are being raised with this societal entitlement, or this feeling of everything is coming to me, and that parents are the ones who are obligated to provide their children with everything. And this, I think, sometimes creates and may have created a generation that feels they are owed everything. They're owed a job, that it's the government's job to provide them with food and with shelter. They're entitled to reparations for something that happened to their ancestors, and that anything and everything unpleasant that happens to them is somebody else's fault. And if they, for example, are clumsy and they aren't paying attention and they trip and they fall, so they look to blame somebody else for what they should have been careful of in the first place. And then they may contrive some emotional impairment in order to sue for damages. They're constantly looking for shortcuts to fulfill their indulgences and self-sacrifice for a greater good. Even their own future good is rarely a part of the equation. The Torah always tells us that one of the things that keeps the Jewish people going is a sense of Mesirat Nefesh, that I will sacrifice for somebody else, even if it's not beneficial for me. And as one rabbi has written, there is no sense of earning or at least justifying one's existence. There are simply expectations, whether it's a car for when you graduate high school, paying your college tuition, either before or after, moving back home after college rent-free, parents paying your expenses, not only for the wedding, but after marriage, etc. Well, if parents buy into this and they comply, even if it means that it may impair their own plans, then that can be very problematic and may be sending the wrong message. And it's here that the meaning, perhaps the underlying idea of the halakha and of the Rambam becomes apparent. Of course, obviously, a parent is going to provide for his or her children even after the age of 6, because, as we said before, being kind and being compassionate and being generous, that's part of the Jewish DNA. But we have to convey to children at a very early age that a parent doesn't owe them that sustenance. Children need to know, when they start to reach the age of understanding, that they have to justify their existence. They aren't entitled to anything. This begins by teaching children responsibility, that everyone has in this family unit, that there is a nuclear bond and everyone is responsible for everyone else. And everyone has to contribute to the greater whole in whatever way they are able to do it. These obligations should be age appropriate, but when it comes to certain basic elements of a household, such as setting the table, clearing the table, caring for the pets, taking out the garbage, etc., that somebody is assigned to do it, and no one should think that it will automatically be done for them. And that's one way to begin to teach accountability and move past this idea of thinking that everything is coming automatically to me. In addition, a psychologist writes, we should teach our children the real value and purpose of money. It is to get us what we need, but not necessarily what we want. And if children are responsible in their own way to earn, they'll become responsible adults as well. And he writes, we must model behavior that communicates that every decision has a cost-benefit component to it. It's okay to occasionally indulge as long as we're aware of the cost that will likely impact another area. And then see these decisions weigh the options and decide what you want to do. They made $5 washing a car. Do you spend it on ice cream now or save it for a toy later? And we should not fall for this this opinion that you're a good parent when you make sure to give your children everything. You're a good parent when you give them an opportunity to earn the best of everything. By taking responsibility and working for something, you obviously develop a much greater appreciation for it. We say that a person is much more interested in one kav, or one portion of something they work for, than 9 that are handed to them. And of course, once children take responsibility and say, I'm also going to contribute and I'm going to work for and earn what I have, that helps to build their self-esteem, to tell them that they're capable and they are able to accomplish something important. Independence certainly is something that builds confidence and makes a person well-adjusted and emotionally secure. So the Torah is trying to send a very profound message to us through these 2 ideas, that your parents do not owe you. Whatever they do for you is not out of obligation, but it's out of love. And once a child begins to internalize his parents' motivation for providing support, it strengthens his appreciation for them and deepens his bond with them. And this is part of the journey. So when the Chazal tell us that there's no automatic inheritance, it's in order to send and there's no obligation to give to anyone in an inheritance. It's to tell them that this is not something that you can automatically expect to come to you. It's something that you have to earn. It's something that ultimately, if you deserve it, you will get it. And the same is true as for any kind of support. And that's why this very strange idea that we don't have to support a child halakhically after the age of 6, because I think the rabbis were saying already by the age of 6, a child is starting to reason and make a judgment decision about the things that he or she sees. And therefore, not saying that you leave a 7-year-old adrift without helping them and providing for them, but simply saying that at about that age, you can begin to teach them responsibility, and not everything is automatically coming to them. And I think you can apply this to many different things. You see in America, for example, this attempt, although at least so far it's been shoved to the side, about paying for kids' tuition. And not only does it create problems for people who paid for their tuition, but it builds a certain character when children, there are really not children already, once they're in college, that they're beginning to take responsibility for themselves. And we look back and I think when we consider the things we did that we earned, that we worked for, and maybe things that parents, we may have considered them overly stern when they said, I'm not handing that to you, you're going to have to earn that, then it teaches a very valuable lesson that really can last a lifetime. Susie always tells the story that when she was living with her parents, that they required her to go to work when she was already a bit older and pay rent. And she first felt, why do I have to pay my parents' rent? But she went and got a job and she paid her parents' rent. And later on, they simply handed her back all the money that she had paid and said, the lesson was not that we don't love you and won't pay for you, but you have to hold your own and be independent and be responsible for yourself. So it's very interesting that this idea comes out a bit in the story of the Benot Slavchad, because they stand up for what they think is right. And Hashem approves and says, you did the right thing by saying that you want to have your own portion of land, which means you'll have to work the land, and if it's going to be productive, you'll be able to depend yourself and your husband, etc. And it's not going to last forever. So this provision, it only was in effect for 14 years. But during that time, it sends a certain message. And that's the idea here as well, that there is a certain period of time where parents have the opportunity to train a child. It doesn't really last forever, because at some point that child is going to go off on his or her own. But during the time, those formative years of growing up is a time the Torah is saying, make sure you use that time wisely so that your child will ultimately be independent and hopefully not have to depend on anyone else. And that's why we say, and we all know, that the highest form of tzedakah is giving somebody else a job and making sure that they can take care of themselves. And that's why, although you should give tzedakah anonymously, this ultimate and greatest act of tzedakah, giving somebody a job, is you don't have to do it anonymously. You can be very proud of it because the person does not lose their self-esteem. The reason you are urged to try to do this anonymously is because when you give somebody tzedakah and all the other forms, it's obviously leaves a certain scar with them, that they are humbled that somebody else had to provide for them. They know deep down every person should be providing for himself or herself. So they're embarrassed to have to accept tzedakah from somebody else. So you try to do it anonymously. But when you give somebody else a job, you're heightening their self-esteem, not lowering it. And therefore, you can be very proud to say, I feel very good that I gave so-and-so a job. And some of us who've had that opportunity to give other people gainful work, it's a win-win situation. So you don't have to take money out of your own pocket. The other person doesn't have to feel ashamed. And then hopefully they'll be able to continue without having to depend on anybody else for charity. So all of this interesting approach, I think, comes out of this story of the Benot Tzlafchad. And maybe it's something that, as a nation, Hashem was also trying to teach us about. Everybody has their own portion. Everybody hopefully will be able to fend for themselves, take care of themselves, and then they'll be better equipped to contribute to the nation as a whole. So I will stop. If anybody has a comment they want to make, let me just see in the chat. Okay, well, that's another story about going to the other side of the Yarden. Okay, so I don't want to get into that now. But if anybody else has something you want to...
No, because that concerns me. They weren't really getting the land. And
yeah, okay, so we would consider that part of our land as well. Once they went there and conquered it, that becomes part of Israel. There's a lot of land that we have. A lot, for example, is something that wasn't initially allotted, but it was conquered in war, and that became part of ours as well. So yes, we have the West Bank, the East Bank. We have different parts of the land that technically belong to us. But the truth is, without getting into it, although, and it's a whole other story, that these were the first tribes to be exiled. So although they were given, Moshe says to them, yes, under the, you meet the conditions, you can indeed inhabit those lands. When the Assyrians come, though, they're the first ones who will be lost in a sense, or will be exiled. So it was a fairly short-lived occupation or residence that they had there. Any other comments? Okay, I'm sure we all have well-adjusted children with great self-esteem, but I think it's an interesting comment. And we all know that when you work for something, and we see this with children who, whatever it may be, something that they construct themselves is always more meaningful to them than something which is simply handed to them. They may ask for these more expensive things, but you'll see children, you can give them the most beautiful picture, but the one they want to hang up is the one that they drew themselves or painted themselves, no matter how bad it may be. So,
Rabbi Weiss, I just wanted to say that my father would have really appreciated this shiur.
Okay. His neshama of Rav Gold should have an aliyah, and everyone should have the sarot tovot. Bezrat Hashem, we shall see you next week, same time, same place, before we end up taking a break. Shabbat shalom u'barak.
Thank you.
Shalom.